Arch, of course, you are most known for your Warhammer coverage. Could you tell us your history with Warhammer, including lawsuits and what have you?
Yes. So I named myself Arch Warhammer initially because I was going to do Warhammer, so it made sense. But after getting into way too much of a confrontation with, actual communists, a Reddit called Sig Marxism sent letters to Games Workshop, the owners of the Warhammer IP and franchise, who sent a cease and desist to me that I could not use Warhammer as part of my name because Warhammer is owned by Games Workshop. It is not merely a mallet; it is something they own. So I had to give up on that, which is a bit annoying, but
Yeah, that's a bummer. So you were just someone that had that as a screen name, and they did not take kindly to it.
No. I was also considering actually fighting that because I'm pretty sure Warhammer is ubiquitous enough a term. But they also sent in the email basically stating that if I didn't change it, they would send cease and desist to anyone who used Warhammer in their title of the video, in their name of their channel, or in their descriptions as well. So I was like, okay, I'm going to burn the entirety of YouTube if I do that. And at that time, I still thought that the community was worth protecting, so I decided to desist.
That probably was the easiest way out of that situation. But still, that does seem like a little bit unappreciative, given your stature in the Warhammer community, which I'm sure was rising even at that time.
Oh yeah, I think already then I had 200,000 odd subscribers. So I was by no means a small person, and I brought a lot of people over to their content. But this was also during the time where cancel culture was at its most prolific. So when the screeching started, they decided to just go with the, screeches. I was hardly the only one to get cancelled over that, but what can you do?
Yeah, no, Zephyr even says that Games Workshop is known for setting their community on fire. I wonder if they'll ever stop the fan fiction. What do you think about that? Do you think that they're going to pull a Wizards of the Coast over at Games Workshop?
At some point, unquestionably. They already did the enormous purge. Oh god, okay. Sleazy Games Workshop tales. So 40K had one of the best fan animations scenes in the world. They had tons of animations made by people who made them for free, and they were produced at a very high quality, including Astartes, which was the big one. And so Games Workshop decided to send cease and desists to all of the YouTube channels who were engaged in making animations, demanding that they stop monetizing via Patreon or ads or anything else like that on the threat of lawsuits. And then they also sent them that if they were willing to come work for Games Workshop directly, then they could maybe continue. And that was how they actually forced a great portion of the animator community to either come work for them for wages that has been rumored to be less than competitive, shall we say, or have their livelihood just yanked out from underneath them overnight.
Oh, that was very gracious of them to do. Let's say.
Very kind.
Yeah, and obviously, because the thing is that they are obviously the owners of Warhammer, and arguments can be made that they haven't been too kind to their community. And I'm not too familiar with Warhammer myself. Like very frequently, people in our chat are going to make like some kind of Warhammer reference. It'll go straight over our heads, and then they have to explain it's Warhammer and tell us we need to have Arch on. So now we are here. But one of the things that I've been hearing is that they're also increasingly trying to introduce like wokeness into Warhammer? Is what's going on with that?
So they've been. I've got a couple people inside of Games Workshop that still talk to me on certain levels on various elements of it. So this mostly comes from the writers of their book, the more liberal-leaning elements of Black Library, which is their book publishing wing. I have had multiple interesting interactions with those writers. One of them gave me my official title, He Who Shall Not Be Named. Because he wrote that on Twitter, that he couldn't speak to me, otherwise he'd be in violation of his contract with GW, which is quite... it's nice to know I have influence, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's not on him. That's on whoever wrote, on the authors of that contract. But yeah, you obviously have influence.
And these are trying to push a certain agenda, and they've been trying for a while now, and Games Workshop has been receptive to a degree. GW is a company that knows very little about the world around itself, which has been one of its greatest strengths and weaknesses over the years. But they have been slowly influenced more and more in the direction of wokeism. Like, they're adding in characters with who are black for no reason. They are adding in new characters. They are adding in female characters. And the worst part is they have good black characters and good female characters already, but they choose to introduce inferior ones. I'm sure that's a tale that you know quite well.
Yeah, it does ring a couple of bells. And how has the fans responded to this? They're relatively predictable, I would imagine.
The response has been a bit of a interesting one, because a lot of people are pushing back against it and pointing out this is not Warhammer, because Warhammer is a fairly inherently conservative setting. Like, progressive ideology does not function in this setting. But there's also the fact that they are living in the UK, where the company that is, where the legal structure is such that you must abide by a lot of the wokeist principles in law. Like, they're not allowed to step too far out of the line. So the company is kind of trying to tread this weird middle ground where they are virtue signaling enough to be perceived as the good guys, but also not making changes in their law either to support it. They're basically kind of straddling both sides right now and trying to figure out which way to go. And there's a whole lot of internal debates around this. I've been told of multiple large-scale meetings where everybody is arguing for the one side or the other, if they should become political, if so, to what extent, if not, then why, etc., etc. So the company's having a bit of a crisis of conscience internally.
Someone needs to send them the latest minutes of the Disney shareholder meeting, just to sway some opinions right there, to see how that's how that's turned out for a company like Disney.
Well, there's the thing too, because Amazon is currently sniffing around Games Workshop, and knowing the kind of effect that Amazon has on pretty much any company, they're going to be almost desperate to please them, because if Amazon buys you out, you can name your price and wander off into retirement for all eternity and sunset, you know? So there's a lot of back and forth there. Amazon recently, in what was presumably a show of good faith, gave Games Workshop access to their own reporting back end, which produced hundreds of takedown notices for Amazon pages of people selling 40K related products, like dice or something like that, who wasn't officially endorsed by Games Workshop. And also taking down people trying to sell their own painted models or their old armies, eBay style. So there are clearly some delicate negotiations going on behind the scenes with some you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours back and forth there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And on the topic of Amazon and just how good this is for consumers, obviously being picked up by Amazon, that would be a huge deal for Games Workshop. Not so sure it's a amazingly great deal for something like Warhammer if they were to proceed with that, I mean, we have the recent news of Rings of Power. I'm just going to share that for one moment here on screen. This is from Forbes, and their headline, and I mean, we might have as well have written this. The Rings of Power, Amazon's big gamble, was a massive flop that most viewers gave up on. Now, this was Amazon through and through, and we now know that 2/3 of audience did not finish the entirety of the season. So of 100% that saw the first episode, only 33% managed to last all the way up until the last episode. So yeah, just it being Amazon isn't necessarily good news. And that's the thing that I really want to talk about, the thing that I can kind of relate to. Because after he decided that he had enough of The Witcher, after DC decided that, this Superman thing, we're going to go a different direction, then Henry Cavill landed on his feet anyway, because he is now supposed to both showrun and star in a Warhammer series coming from Amazon and the corporate owners of Warhammer. Can this be good? Because you have Henry Cavill. He is obviously a fan. He wants what's best for it. I don't know that Amazon wants what's best for it, and where Games Workshop is concerned, I don't know that they know what they want to do with it. So what have you heard from the behind the scenes of this series? What's going on with it? Is it happening?
So there's a lot of confusion as to exactly what's going on here, because I do have a guy in Amazon who is fairly in the know, and he's basically explained to me that there has been no allocations of resources of any kind towards any kind of a purchase of studios or assets or anything like that. There seems to be no planning. There's no hiring going on. But Games Workshop officially did announce that they were in talks with Amazon and Henry Cavill. This happened almost immediately after the rumor started, though. So it might have been Games Workshop basically trying to get as much positive PR as they could. But at the same time, as I also mentioned, there is clearly some kind of seductive back and forth talk between the two companies. Games Workshop have made overtures to Amazon, where they, for example, removed a portion in their yearly investor report, because every year they added in, after an email campaign I did, incidentally, that they will not do diversity hiring. They will hire solely based on merit for the position. They removed that this year. And we know that Amazon, of course, has a diversity and inclusion policy as a requirement for anyone they work with. So that might have been GW going, okay, we'll agree with this. And then Amazon goes, okay, this is access to our back end, take down the products there. So it seems as if the two are kind of dancing around each other to see if they can figure out how to do this project, which I do think would be highly beneficial at the very least for Games Workshop, because Henry Cavill is almost certain to do a good job because he appears to actually care about the franchise.
Yeah. And we are losing Tom here, so I hope that you have fun with Super Mario.
I hope so.
Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to it. And going back to what Arch was saying about no funds being allocated by Amazon to Warhammer just yet. Now, we are in the lucky position that we have both a professional screenwriter and a former network executive on the panel. So, Script, let's begin with you. What does this say about the prospects for Warhammer?
At this point, this early in the game, I don't know. I mean, yes, Henry Cavill has a vested interest, and it's my understanding that his girlfriend is the licensee for it for MEitM. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. I think that
she is his agent. So in effect, yes, she's the one who sells.
The one who sells, but I think that she's the one that secured the rights for her boyfriend and I guess also client at this point. So I mean, that's pretty good that you have your main lead, your money draw stars, as it were, in a certain position of control over the property. The question being is like, how good is he going to be at studio politics to navigate this? Because he hasn't fared very well with Witcher, and he definitely has not fared very well with Superman. Who's else is going to be on his side to make sure that this is the best iteration of the franchise that it can be?
Very few would be my guess. Because honestly, the thing is, he is going to go into this as a fan who wants to make a thing that is good for fans. That is my assessment, not having spoken to the guy or anything like that, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But in the modern day environment, that is not going to earn him a lot of friends, I think. So he's probably going to run into quite stiff opposition there, as we saw on the Witcher set, where there was even the first little thing they had with a little tiss about him, which sounded all nice and convivial at the time, where they'd written in the death of his horse, Roach, and it was supposed to be comedic, and he apparently kicked up a bit of a fuss about this. Like, no, this is not at all how this should happen or how it would happen.
Yeah.
And so he clearly got into a bit of a spat with the writer team who, like, back at the time, there was a bunch of Twitter messages like, oh, he knows it really well, so we let him write it, and it was really cool, as if they were being really nice about it. But probably, as a professional Hollywood scriptwriter, being told by the dumb meat bro actor that you don't understand the setting, what are the odds they were like, oh yeah, this is fun and nice? Or...
Well, it depends. If I actually did know it and then the actor said I didn't, that would be a point of contention. If they called me out and exposed me for being, quote unquote, a fraudulent creator, as Henry Cavill has seemed to have done with The Witcher, all I would probably do is what writers used to do back in the day, especially for network television and soaps, is, well, this character is going to die. And that's how you get him out of the contract, essentially. It again, you're talking about two groups of people that are very ego driven in an industry that is also ego driven. Lots of clashing tends to happen in that regard.
Yes, and in this case, he would also be introduced into a setting where, because one of the things with the Black Library writers, the people writing a lot of these stories for 40K, a lot of them often have a tendency to sort of claim portions of the setting for their own, often to the point of inventing entire new things or plots or character personalities that then become their thing. And this is in an effort, in part, for them to secure their own bread and butter, so that they can keep writing this character. It works relatively well most of the time, but it has led to some really ridiculous portions of 40K lore. So Henry Cavill would quite possibly run into people who have a vested interest in being allowed to define their portions of the lore, and who could also argue at least semi-competently in their understanding of it. So I think he's up for an uphill struggle, especially as a lot of these authors also have very clear left-wing biases, introducing things like pronouns in 40K, a universe that really does not give a shit about pronouns.
My understanding is that they have far more pressing matters to address than that.
Yes, and they did it for Tech Priestess too, which is a half machine. So the machine does not care if it is being referred to as he or she. It is a machine.
Yeah, the other part too is that like among the writers that I've interacted with, not many of them actually are very familiar with 40K. So I'm wondering is how many writers are you going to find who can also write a great story, but are also familiar enough with 40K to do it justice, and also how many of them in this day and age, and I think they're fairly few, are very good writers that are willing to jump into 40K to do it justice.
And who will be able to do so openly as well. Who will be able to go in there and go like, okay, I'm going to appreciate this, instead of, well, this is fascist, let's fix it.
Yeah, I mean, if it was fascist, I'd be leading into it, because you could have fun with that in that universe, could you not?
You could. The problem is, I actually did an entire video on this, like why 40K wasn't fascist. It's because it literally can't. It is too vast, it is too complex, and it is too low tech. It is closer to feudalistic theocracy than anything, which is also why the setting does lean into that quite a bit as well, because you can absolutely make a lot of good stories around a massive bureaucratic system that is groaning under its own weight and how that tries to operate in a hostile galaxy.
Yeah, that's already piqued my interest, actually.
Yeah, Mr. Chato, you've been listening to the conversation. As a former network executive, what do you think Amazon is waiting on?
With regards to Warhammer,
Yeah,
wow. I mean,
they
you know,
haven't
that's
allocated the funds yet.
one property that's very popular that I know very little about, and I hate to admit that in front of Arch. I guess I should do some research on it. It seems like feudal mech.
Sort of.
Is
40K
that-
has been almost popping for like 10 years, which is why a lot of people have heard of it, but they don't really know of it. So you're not alone in that regard.
No, I'm a big mech fan, but it seems like an anachronistic mech, where there's machinery back when there really wasn't machinery, but they had it. Giant tanks and mech suits, but everything else around them is very agricultural.
It does look incredibly cool, though. So just from the look alone, from that appearance, you'd think that Amazon would be interested. Arch, what do you think might happen going forward with Warhammer, especially on Amazon?
Well, there's a couple of different possibilities here, overarching wise. One is that they do get Cavill on board, and Cavill is beloved by the 40K community. The man has done a fantastic job PRing with fans, if he hasn't done it with anyone else, it seems like. So it would almost certainly be a very large success if it was to be arranged. But as the other two here pointed out, I don't know if he's going to have the actual institutional clout to get it done. And if he does, if he will be in a position to do it correctly and properly, or if he'll be hamstrung. Because 40K also has a long and proud history of failing when it comes to making movies. There's been no less than 5 attempts to make a 40K movie, only one of which succeeded, and he produced an absolutely awful 3D CGI style movie called Ultramarines, which no one talks about anymore for very good reasons.
Is there a single main character that he would play?
There are many opportunities for Cavill, because the 40K universe is enormous. It has hundreds of books, thousands of pages of laws, dozens upon dozens of characters. And it depends on what direction they'll go in, because there's the mythical backstory, the origins of the universe, which is the Horus Heresy, in which case you could play one of the larger-than-life demigod characters of the time, or he could play a modern character. And personally, I would prefer it if he played a more human, down-to-earth character, because I think the best introduction to the universe for most normal people would be to see a human rather than seeing a space marine, because then you have to ask the question, what is a space marine? Why are they huge? Why are they so angry? Etc., etc.
Yeah, there's some elements to it that look like oh god, the people who did Warcraft, the space version of it.
Yes, in fact,
Pardon me, what?
Blizzard was originally hired to make a Warhammer game, which is the fantasy equivalent of 40K. Games Workshop, for unknown reasons, canceled the contract out of goddamn nowhere, citing complaints with the alpha test version. And back then, since there was no legal repercussions really, Blizzard was just, okay, well, we put all our time and money into this. We're just going to release it anyway, but change the names around, and such was Warcraft 1.
Or StarCraft, right?
StarCraft.
Yep, StarCraft 2
Yeah,
followed
so
pretty
it's-
much the same mold.
Yeah, this
where
is reminding me a lot of StarCraft. Used to be a big player of it, and then Blizzard became a horrible company, and I just got rid of my account.
StarCraft is damn near a 1-to-1 for characters, stories, and race-wise of 40K.
Okay. Got it.
Oh,
Now
so
I'm
Protoss
getting
in in Warhammer, huh? Okay.
Oh yeah, the Protoss are the Eldar. They've even got the same style of religion, background, and many kinds of weapons and style too.
I get it. Yeah, so there's something for Henry to do. I mean, from an Amazon perspective, you've got warring factions within a group. They've already gotten bit once with Rings of Power, and they got to find a way out of that morass somehow.
Yep.
And I think they're, I as an executive, I don't know where you would start with this. You would really need to have a strong executive with a strong hand on the tiller to be able to get this thing working, notwithstanding Henry Cavill's involvement. He would just be a very small piece of the puzzle. Look, he was a very big piece in Witcher, and he couldn't get them to do what the books originally indicated. And with regards to Witcher and actors, I have found it very counterproductive to do what the actor suggests 95% of the time. And that's even within the context of a show that's working really, really well, and people have their own ideas, which you never want to hear. Script doctor, I'm sure will agree with me. And then you've got the problem with Witcher, where no one's agreeing to anything. So that's a worse situation. So whose ideas do you go with? And then now you've got Warhammer, and I have no idea. Do you have any idea what Cavill's idea for the franchise would be?
Not really. He's been keeping his cards very close to his chest in that regard, probably also because he too is probably fishing with this, because he knows he has a lot of fan support, but not a whole lot of institutional support. And from Amazon's perspective, that's probably the reason why they're interested too, because they need a PR win, especially after Rings of Power. And Cavill could give them that, especially after DC also elected to pass on the obvious PR score, which would be to get him back as Superman.
Well, and then there's the other element to this too, which is maybe a bit of a halo effect. That I mean, if this is anything like StarCraft, there's a crap ton of CGI that's got to accompany the production of it. Would you say that Warhammer would be a heavily CGI'd product?
It does depend on what they go for. If they go with Imperial Guard, which are the regular soldiers of the universe, you could do this without a whole lot. In fact, fan productions have done very good-looking fan productions of 40K with very little CGI. But if you were to go for the big crowd pleasers, the fan favorites like the Space Marines, yeah, they're all like 3 meters tall, genetically enhanced super soldiers wearing power armor. You're right. You're gonna have a hard time making a suit like that.
Right. Yeah. So as an executive, that quite possibly would be the thing that scares me the most.
Yes, it would be an enormous expenditure if you decided to go for something like that. It'd be stupidly expensive. And you would also then be banking on, okay, like if you couldn't make this work with Lord of the Rings, one of the largest properties on Earth, and now you're going to bank on 40K, which is, it's happening, but it's not Lord of the Rings. And you're going to put
where did the
40K
name come from?
It's from the setting. It is in the 41st millennium in humanity's future.
Gotcha. Okay. See, so, I'm learning new stuff.
I'm also imagining that Amazon's investors, etc., are looking at this and going like, do we really want to get into another major IP right now?
I would suggest that they're not on a roll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely.
No, we just saw what happened with the Rings of Power. I was not pretty.
No, that was an absolute disaster from beginning to end. And I know also from my insider on Amazon, investors have been calling and yelling very loudly at Amazon Studios over that, because they were, of course, told that, yeah, this is Lord of the Rings. There's no way this can be a failure. It's going to be huge. And then it hit televisions, and people looked at it and went, wow, somebody stole our money.
Well, certainly I did actually a video sketch of it where some Brit in an alleyway sold something called rights to Jeff Bezos, and he didn't really know what he was buying and didn't realize that he pretty much got nothing out of the deal. There's a lot of angry people involved in that show.
And the thing is that they were all warned. I mean, there were so many people that
True.
knew from the moment that this is going to be a disaster. The right situation, it was all there, plain and public. So everyone, like any one of us here on YouTube and so many other forums, could tell right away that what they're doing with the Rings of Power is destined to fail. There is no scenario under which this is going to be successful. Simply cannot happen. What is frustrating then is that they would let that failure possibly dissuade them from taking on something like Warhammer. But there's a real risk that could happen, isn't it, Paul?
Oh, absolutely. There's not a lot of confidence in the studio to be able to execute anything. And I know this is now that I've tapped into Arch's knowledge, just the fact that this would be a huge 3D budget. I mean, there's a massive 3D budget even on Rings of Power, and they blew it on that. But this would even be more difficult because you've got just heads of human beings sticking out of mech suits. I mean, the challenge of this is going to be way more complex.
Yep. And for far less sure returns as well. Because again, whilst 40K it's doing okay, if you couldn't make Rings of Power stick, how are you going to convince people you're going to make this one stick?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this thing has, if it's got aliens like StarCraft, then those are fully CGI.
And not only aliens, so some of them are just enormous tyrannid monster bugs too. So that would have to be done all in 3D.
Yeah.
Yep. No clever costumes or animatronic stuff allowed anymore.
Nope.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, I think this is fraught with danger. And if I was an exec at Amazon, I wouldn't be going ahead with this anytime soon.
And that could possibly be why we haven't heard anything new. Because they are worried, because they just got their ass kicked by the Rings of Power, and here's another thing that would probably be every bit as expensive, and they're not sure what to do about it.
Well, not only that, Amazon, I think, recently announced that they just did a production with the Russo brothers where they spent like $300 million for 6 40-minute episodes. Like, that's an abuse of spending money. So yeah, it just boggles my mind the way that Amazon is throwing money around at stuff that's either untested or just backed or just has a foundation from very inexperienced producers. And at the same time, you do have this franchise of 40K, which is definitely going to need a heck of a lot of money, but we're not hearing anything about people being courted to help develop this. And that makes me question, well, why would they be interested in it anyways, considering how much money they've thrown behind Rings of Power and behind this new Russo brothers show, when something of this that has a fairly sizable fan base isn't getting any sort of traction in comparison.
But isn't this kind of an odd fan base? I don't mean to be insulting.
Mm-hmm. No worries. I've been told worse.
No, but this is, I mean, I like an awful lot of the stuff that this should represent. I mean, I was a StarCraft player for a decade, more than a decade. And this was just completely off my radar. How was this off my radar? I mean, it seems to be very almost Dungeons and Dragon-y kind of deep lore.
Well, it's in large part because 40K, it's kind of veering away from this more and more as it grows more mainstream, but it was a very dark universe. The entire point is that humanity is doomed. It is just a long, brutal struggle against alien invaders, sinister corruption, and it is
Trans
a
activists.
universe. Yeah, and it is a universe in which extreme authoritarianism is not only necessary, but it is a moral good, because the only other option is the extermination of humanity. It is an inherently conservative setting, which is also one of the reasons why I think is going to be a big risk in today's environment.
And you have another property that, I mean, it's not the same thing, but parallels that Arcane is based on a game, which I've never played. I don't like that style of game, but was hugely popular, or at least I don't know how popular it was for Netflix, but it was, there was an awful lot of people who were invested in it from the game.
Yes, League of Legends. I'm presuming it did well because they are working on a second season right now.
Yeah, it's an expensive animation to make. Yes, the animation was very, very successful. Yeah, but the League of Legends, I ran afoul of that group of people. Holy smokes.
League of Legends is also the single largest one of the MOBAs right now. And
yes.
It has so much money.
Right, and I hate MOBA games. Hate them.
Good. They're awful.
They're good. I don't understand their popularity. So, I mean, I'm just finding parallels for Warhammer and where it fits in all of this, and whether there's a community that's going to support it financially if it comes out as a TV show.
Yes and no. The core 40K audience absolutely will. They have been used to getting milked like mad by Games Workshop, which is an incredibly abusive financial company. And this is a hobby where creating a single playable army costs several $100s, and then you need to paint it by hand manually. So it's a fandom where people do have plenty of money to spend on useless garbage.
And time. I mean, this is a significant investment, it sounds like. Investment in money and time.
Yes.
Which creates, so those that do it will be really passionate about it.
Yes. But the wider audience that they have been trying to court don't. Like, Warhammer's fan base has grown very large in one way and not very much in another. How do I put it? Like, their core fan base is about the same size as always, but it's been a bit more accessible with the introduction of the internet and the fact that Games Workshop is a bit more communicative these days than it was. And yet the overall popularity of everything remains kind of the same.
Sounds to me like fanatical model train collectors. I have one friend of mine's one, and I'm surprised he's still married.
That is not a bad comparison at all.
Yeah. I want to bring up this super chat here. Marksman of 117B says, Chato may have found the kindred spirit in Arch.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Arch is cool.
Oh, thank you.
Oh.
I get it. I mean, I totally get it. I'm not immersed in that group, but I've seen them. I've played Risk for 15 hours straight, in games rooms. I've played Dungeons and Dragons. It's kind of part of that super ultra geekdom. So it's interesting. Yeah, as an Amazon exec, I'd stay away for now.
Yeah, but as a fan, you'd be all over it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on which kind of fan. I mean, if you're looking for your own selfish interests, and yeah, you want to see these characters come to life. But part of the challenge is that most of the IPs that we are celebrating came from nothing. This whole business of repurposing existing IPs, I don't think has got necessarily long-term legs. Because you look at Star Wars, that didn't come from anything except for George Lucas. It became an IP eventually. Look at Harry Potter. That wasn't a previous IP. That was came out of the mind of J.K. Rowling, and then it became an IP. So this whole business of taking existing IPs and wrestling them down, I think is almost counterproductive. You're almost better off trying to build one from scratch and have it build slowly and then own it and have much more control over it.
Yeah, that is solid advice right there. And statistically, it is really successful the times that it works. But then again, there are many would-be franchises that never really took off either. However, we do have a number of more super chats here, so let's see what you and the audience have to say.